Make sure I've got no ketchup on my beard. Right, so that has happened in the past. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to another video, and tonight I am joined by two illustrious guests from the vinyl community. You can see up there on the left, Mr. John Heaton. Hi John. Hello John.
Hello. Good evening.
Yeah, John's just stumbled out of bed, so he's a bit slow this evening. And we've got Andrew Brooks down at the bottom. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, James. Hello, John. I've just stumbled in from work. So.
Superb. Yeah, great honour to host you both on this channel. I have guested on a couple of your videos, Andrew, already. So it's nice to welcome you to this particular little enclave. So this video is actually, this was your idea, I think. Was it John or Andrew or both? You cooked this one up together and suggested it to me.
I think it was John's idea. So
yeah, okay. So John must be good with his dates, because he'd worked out that it is the 50th birthday of this album, RAM, by Paul and Linda McCartney. So we just thought we'd do a little happy birthday video to RAM, really. There's no particular concept to this video, is there, other than just kind of celebrating this record, I guess. So who'd like to get started?
Yep. I'll start.
Right.
This has been one of my favourite Paul albums forever. I can't even remember a time before I knew it. Obviously, I came into the Beatles after this was released, but I can't remember not owning this record. And I've always loved it, and I've probably neglected it in the past few years. Maybe I haven't played it as much. So today I've heard it twice on the way into work and twice on the way home from work, and I have just totally fallen in love with this album again. And for me, it's a perfect album.
Well, I think a perfect album is stretching it a bit. I will say it's got plenty of the McCartney magic on it. It's definitely up there in one of his top post-Beatles albums. One can pick out a few criticisms, such as the lyrics are not particularly meaningful and they're not trying to send a message, but maybe that's one of its charms. Whilst George Harrison was getting all spiritual and John Lennon was doing his primal scream, Paul was mainly just talking about the comforts of home and love and the countryside, and that's very refreshing in many ways. So there's a lot more good to this record than bad. There are a few flaws on it which we'll come to, but on the whole, a stunning record and an improvement on the first album.
Yeah, I just wish he'd write some of the songs now like he'd written back then.
My copy of RAM was bought from Boots in Chester in roughly 1983, 84, and you can still see the price of tax sticker there, and you can still see the Boots sticker there. £3.99. I was about 13 or 14 when I heard this record, so it doesn't go straight back all the way back for me, like Band on the Run and London Town do, because I was listening to them when I was really small. So maybe for that reason, RAM has never quite occupied the very top level of my heart. I do remember when I first heard it back in the day, not being completely bowled over by it, and I think I was aware at the time that it did have quite a checkered reputation. It hadn't been very well reviewed when it came out, and that reputation had kind of continued for a long time. And I've got to be honest, it was only when I started watching YouTube videos, and after I joined the VC and started watching various videos, it started to creep up on me. Wow, this album is really well regarded, and it makes so many people's top spot. When people do their album rankings videos, it's so many people have it top, and it did genuinely surprise me. But it's now kind of 5 years down the line, and I've kind of got used to this idea now that RAM is everybody's favorite album. But for years, that's not how it appeared to me.
It's really fascinating to look at how it was received at the time by critics. But I think at the time, McCartney's public image was very negative. He was being blamed for the breakup. People resented the presence of Linda as much as they resented the presence of Yoko, probably. And they just wanted the old John and Paul partnership to be back together, frankly.
When you look at what John's output was at the same time as Paul's output, they're just universes apart, aren't they? You've got Plastic Ono Band and Primal Scream and all that going on, and then you've got Paul, eating at home and Heart of the Country, and I just don't see how those two things would have worked together.
Having said that, I was reading again today this book. This is the Luca Parasi, Paul McCartney recording sessions, and he makes there's an extremely interesting section on Monkbury Moon Delight, which I'd always thought of as just being this mad comedy song, and it's a genuinely fascinating description of the song, and he sees it as definitely as kind of Paul's attempt to do something similar to the kind of Primal Scream, John Lennon thing. You've got all these kind of tortured lyrics. He makes this really interesting point that the line about the piano up my nose, the original draft of that apparently was pillow up my nose.
Yeah, I've got the lyric book here and there as pillow.
And he makes the point, he draws a parallel with with that story that McCartney tells of being on the farm, drinking himself to death almost. And he tells the story of not being able to raise his face from the pillow one morning because he's so depressed about the Beatles breaking up. And it's really fascinating. What a fascinating insight that is, that he may have started that track with that line, a pillow up my nose, I can't move my head off the pillow, and yet it still does sound like a comedy song. That's the thing about it. Paul was incapable really of doing a John Lennon and doing something that was genuinely kind of anguished and terrifying, so he had to kind of do it in a sort of jaunty, quirky, McCartney-ish sort of way. But it's quite interesting. And then you get all the lyrics that are kind of these little barbed attacks on John Lennon, and there's a kind of a subtext of stuff that runs through it, which is maybe a bit more bitter and a bit more kind of angsty than you might think from McCartney. So I take your point, Andrew. I think, this is a McCartney album, but it's maybe not quite as kind of, fruity and wholesome and just wacky as it might appear on first listening.
Interesting point about the vocal similarities on Monkbury to John's album. I think harmonically or whatever, to listen to, yes, you're right, but the lyrics don't say, as you say, they're just joke lyrics. And it's almost as if he can't be bothered to say anything serious in his lyrics. But then he catches people off guard because, what seems like a throwaway song like Dear Boy is actually addressed to Linda's first husband, for example. And then what seems like throwaway lyrics in Too Many People or Three Legs are pretty much aimed at the other three Beatles, right? So whilst Paul is not often displaying much emotion or much of himself, well, it's not quite true because he does great love songs, but he doesn't bare his soul in the same way Lennon does. But there's a lot more personal stuff in there than one might, if one was just listening to it casually, I don't think one would pick up.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for years and years I didn't. I mean, I must have listened to this album for at least 10 years before I, really started to listen to the words. I mean, I'll say, musically, the album is quite interesting because he did just record it with a load of session musicians, which when you listen to it, it's quite weird because you think of albums that are recorded with session musicians, they can be quite soulless and quite characterless. But for some reason, or he did something with RAM, I don't know what it was, but just the way he worked with these guys, they were just sort of, pickup musicians, people like Hugh McCracken and Dave Spinoza and Denny Sywell at this point was only a kind of, jobbing New York drummer. But when you listen to the album, it sounds like they've been playing together for years. It just sounds so organic. Maybe it was just a mix or something, or there's just some trick, there's some little sweet thing that he's kind of stirred into it. And you don't get this kind of sense of a generic bunch of studio musicians who are just kind of, making an album because they're being paid to do it.
I was saying Hugh McCracken doesn't put a foot wrong in his entire life. I mean, well, he's dead now, unfortunately, but every record he was on, he was just outstanding. And Dave Spinoza's the same. And it's quite interesting to note that those two musicians played with John as well as Paul.
Mm.
I think they're the only two that I can think of that played with both.
There's the amazing guitar solo, isn't there, on Mind Games?
On Assume Sen.
Yeah. Just one of the most incredible guitar solos on any record I've ever heard, I think. Just really great.
After 5 minutes of struggling through that song, you finally get this great solo at the end.
Yeah.
Which makes up for a lot.
listening to Denny's drumming today,
Mm.
as you say, he's not just a session drummer. He's putting his all into this, and he's adding so much to the production and the sound of the record itself. And I'd struggle to think of anyone who he was with after that, adding that same sort of sound, drumming sound.
I think Denny and Paul were quite close for a while, because I think Denny was the first. I think he was the first musician on board, wasn't he? I think they recorded Monkey Delight first, and it was just Paul and Denny went in to do it together. So I think they'd already formed a bit of a bond, and clearly that was true, because he was going to invite Denny to be in Wings eventually. So they clearly bonded. But you can definitely hear they've clicked. He sounds a bit like Ringo on some tracks. I think he's got the tea towels on the drums and everything. He's just got a bit of a Ringo sound. And I guess we should say that, I mean, this album is quite Beatlesy, isn't it? It's more Beatlesy than the Wings albums that came after it. I did a video ages ago where I was kind of making the point that it's quite strange that he makes this album, it sounds like his attempt to do something really ambitious and Beatlesy, but then he sort of retreats from that. He then just goes off and does Wildlife, and he takes his career off into a different direction. He doesn't really try and follow Ram up with other albums like Ram. So it seems like a quite unique record in his catalogue. It
took me years to realise that the majority of the album was recorded before Christmas in the year 1970 in New York. So it's very close time-wise to the breakup. And one can feel all many facets of Paul's Beatle character coming through on this record. But on the other hand, it's defiantly a Paul and Linda record. Is as if he's saying, okay, I don't really need the group anymore. This is me and my wife doing what we do. And isn't it glorious? And by the way, yes, I believe we can't be wrong. It's really infuriated John.
Yeah, I mean, there's just some of his classic McCartney songs, just all, on this album, just one after the other. And as I said earlier, I just wish he could go back to writing that sort of stuff as opposed to some of the nonsense that we're getting at the moment. For me, it's Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey, just, telling the story in a typical McCartney way.
Yeah.
And for me, that's probably, my top spot, and probably followed by the use of a ukulele. I wonder what George thought of McCartney using a ukulele on his album.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great track. It's two songs jimmy together, isn't it, really? I mean, I will say about this record, I mean, I've always said that Band on the Run is McCartney's best album. Whether I'm right or not, I don't know, and this is not the video to get into that, I guess. But my feeling with Band on the Run, apart from Picasso's Last Words, which is, to me, it seems more close in spirit to the stuff on Ram, the songs on Band on the Run, to me, sound very focused. They sound like each one has definitely got its own identity. It's thought through from start to finish. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And each song definitely it does one thing and does it really well. Like a track like Let Me Roll It, it's so focused. You get no sense of it that it's just 2 or 3 songs that he's jammed together and done a bit of an arrangement on,
Yeah.
And Mrs. Vanderbilt saying, whereas on Ram, I get the sense that there's a lot of really good ideas, but he's maybe not thinking in terms of like a through composed song. There's lots of tracks where it's stuff that's been jemmy together, and he's ladled this kind of arrangement over it. So you've got, Long-Haired Lady is like that. I mean, God knows how many songs are going on in that one. It's just such a hodgepodge, isn't it?
But that also is the beauty of like Denny's drumming, that he just like you don't even notice the join. His drumming is just going from one to the next, and and it's they are gemmed together, but they're gems that are gemmed together.
Jimmy Gems, I like it. Yeah, but I mean, I guess, the backseat of my car. I know, John, you mentioned in a video quite recently, didn't you? You were talking about songs that McCartney doesn't know how to end, and I guess that's a good example of that, isn't it? If you compare it to 1985, which is just utterly composed, there's nothing about it which is left to chance. It's like, this is it. Whereas Backseat of My Car, you get this, it's almost being improvised. It's this incredible arrangement, but it's like, oh my God, there's another bit being tagged onto the end of it, and another bit and another bit. It's like, when's this going to end?
A couple too many herbal cigarettes smoked during the making of this album, because I don't know, that this track, yeah, but Backseat of My Car, the last minute is just pointless, and he did make the same mistake on Dear Friend on Wildlife as well. That goes on a minute too long. I'm not sure what the problem is, why he can't do a fade or just come to a conclusion. I even noticed on Too Many People, there's a few seconds at the end of that which are a bit not too needed, should we say? Not a very smooth end to that song. But
what about
going back to your question on
that seems to go on forever as well, doesn't it?
yeah,
off at least
I mean,
a minute off that
it's
one.
it's a lovely song, and it mentions the town I live in, so I'm happy about that, Billy Budapest. I don't get the gist of your letter, so that's great. But it does go on too long, yeah. And I don't know. Before I get to the flaws, I'd just like to point out on side one, Too Many People is one of McCartney's best ever tracks. I absolutely love it to death. And Uncle Albert is a masterpiece, even though it divides opinion. I noticed in the Ultimate Record Guide, those clowns gave Uncle Albert 2 stars. You know, they just haven't a clue, have they?
No.
Anyway, Smile Away is my least favorite on side one by quite a distance. I find the lyrics quite annoying about, man, I can smell your feet a mile away. The only sophisticated thing about that song, and it is to its credit, is the superb harmony vocals from Linda. And she does it throughout this album. She sings really, really quite well with Paul, and the two voices go well together. I think on Long Haired Lady, it's not quite so good, shall we say. That's probably her weak moment, but I think her vocals are mixed way too loud on the chorus of Long Haired Lady. So that there's things like that which would stop me saying this is a perfect album, Andrew. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just going to Linda's vocals, some of the backing vocals certainly one of the first few tracks on it, when her and Paul are singing, they've got like a kind of choir sort of backing. The voices are really like lifted, as if they're singing a choir. And you can hear it's just Paul and Linda, and presumably they must have double tracked and triple tracked maybe, but yeah, it's the backing vocals from them just really make some of them songs. On the
Backseat of My Car, there's really amazing vocal stuff on that. You've got McCartney doing his kind of Beach Boys impression, doing these kind of deep voices and all kinds of mad stuff, you know. And I think it was like I was saying before, you get this kind of sense that he's really wearing his arranger's hat on this album, and he's trying to do something very kind of, you know, Brian Wilson-y, shall we say, or really quite complex. And then to go from this to say, you know, Mumbo and Bit Bop, which are only a few months away from being recorded. I mean, the sessions for RAM and the sessions for Wildlife, there's hardly any space between them, you know. And there's tracks that were recorded originally for RAM, which ended up on Red Rose Speedway. So, you know, these albums are all quite close together in time, and yet RAM's just seems a different beast altogether to either Wildlife or Red Rose Speedway. Those records seem different somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, it might have been Linda's influence of kicking him out of bed, saying, "Come on, you've got to do some work." And so he's polished these ones off and then just gone and done Wildlife.
Yeah, I was going to say, I get quite annoyed when people praise this album to the skies and slag off Wildlife and Red Rose Speedway. To me, the first 4 albums very much belong to the same family in terms of Paul's career. I think Band on the Run was where he took it in another direction and came back with a lot more confidence. But these first 4, very similar in feel. And actually, the one thing I'd say about RAM, to its detriment, is it's a tiny bit manufactured. He's kind of trying to create these collages and throw songs together, and whereas Wildlife is just a lot simpler, and some would say shoddy or whatever, but really beautiful in its simplicity. And Red Rose Speedway I'm equally as fond of as this album RAM, but it tends to get derided for some reason.
I've always loved Wildlife as well.
Yeah, me too.
It's totally different. It's totally different to this, but for me, it's up there. You know, there are detractors for Wildlife when they like RAM and Red Rose Speedway, but you got to think, well, you know, as you say, they were all written probably not written, but certainly all recorded within a very small space of time, and you know, I'm sure maybe some of the tracks were interchangeable from one to the other, and maybe could have been spread out over 3 or 4 albums.
I think essentially, Ram is a studio record. It's a studio album. It was recorded as a studio album. It was conceived as one. It was written as one. It was produced as one. Whereas Wildlife and Red Rose Speedway are band albums. Quintessentially, he forms a band, and they do a bit of rehearsal in the barn, and then they make an album. It's nothing like how Ram was recorded. If you compare Wildlife to Ram, it was recorded really quickly, wasn't it? Wildlife, a few days or whatever, and tune up the instruments, and the engineer complained that he wasn't even given enough time to get a good sound on the desk. It was just like, come on, just do it, whereas Ram took about 3 months or something like that. So should we go back and do a couple more track analyses? I mean, I haven't said what tracks I like on this record particularly.
Yeah, go for it, James. What are yours?
I'm really fond of Eat at Home, actually, even though it's probably the most simplistic kind of daft song on. I just love the feel of it. I love the drumming on it. I love the Buddy Holly kind of sound on it. It's a real McCartney going back to his roots kind of song. And it's the one song on the record that when I hear it, I really just want to be in the studio watching them do it. It just sounds like they're having such a ball, making it. It's one of the more immediate tracks. It seems a bit less burdened down, shall we say, with big arrangements. It's quite kind of immediate.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably quite a few tracks on this album which he could do now on stage. Well, the only one I've ever seen him do live is Ram On. At Hyde Park, came on with his ukulele, and before he did something, and he just did a very nice rendition of Ram On, and it was totally out of the blue, and that's the only time I've ever seen him, I think, do anything from Ram.
He's done too many people. I don't think I've seen him do it, but he has done that one, and he's also done Another Day.
Are we classing Another Day as a Ram? Do you think if they'd have had space on the vinyl, that it would have been on there, should have been on there?
Well, it was from the same sessions. It was the only reason it wasn't on the album is because in those days they didn't put singles on albums. But it's every bit part of the Ram sessions. And to me, you're not going to like this, but I think it's better than anything on the album.
Whoa!
No. But let me qualify that. I think Another Day is absolutely sensational, and I hate people who slag it off for the lyrics about, even on the Bobby Whitlock channel, I was watching the other day, George Harrison brought in this cassette and played a song to Bobby and said, "Who's this?" And Bobby said, "I've no idea, but it doesn't sound very good to me." And this is Paul McCartney. It's the new single, Another Day. And I don't think either of them were very impressed, but screw them. It's a great track.
I agree, John. Yeah.
When I did my ranking of McCartney singles on Wings singles, I think I put it right at the top.
Wow.
I first heard that song on the Wings' Greatest LP, because I heard that album before I heard Ram, and it's the opening song on that, isn't it? And great track, great song.
Even though it's not Wings, on Wings Greatest.
Yeah, but that's good enough.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I agree with you, James, about Eat at Home. It's an absolute highlight for me, and I love the musicianship. It's a real feel-good track, and I think Lennon probably enjoyed this track. I know he said he liked some bits of Ram.
Yeah.
He didn't like other bits, but I guess he probably got off on this track because it's effortless Paul, really.
Yeah. And then you've got Dear Boy, which is the opposite to it. I mean, Dear Boy is the most ambitious song on the album, vocally. It was the track, I think Elton John made some quite nice comments about it, didn't he, when it first came out. I think Elton John was quite kind of bowled over by the incredible vocal arrangement on it. And I think to me, Dear Boy and Smile Away, they're incredibly, not Smile Away, Eat at Home, they sort of represent this sort of opposite ends of the album in terms of one being very simplistic and very visceral and rock and roll kind of stuff, and then you've got Dear Boy, which is the Brian Wilson moment, the very Beach Boysian kind of thing. Both fantastic songs, I think.
This CD copy, John, you'll be pleased to know, has actually got Another Day and Oh Woman Oh Why on it.
Yeah, that's the 1993
remaster.
copy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shall we sort of climax the video then by just making a kind of little summary statement each about where we think this record fits into the kind of, the hierarchy? Because we talked already about the fact that so many people do seem to have it on the top of their list. I know it's not on the top of John's list. I don't think it's on the top of my list either. So, Andrew, do you want to go first? Is this
Okay. Well,
is this
yeah.
top,
I mean,
this?
the the top of my list is still, I would still say, Back to the Egg,
Hmm.
but and sort of London Town. Ram was still up there, but it's certainly gone up, probably above Band on the Run these days. Yeah, it's certainly I'd say within the top five, but if not top three. Just listening to it today, it's just, I loved it all over again, as if it was like listening to it with new ears, especially the remastered, from the archive. So yeah, it's a perfect album for me as a solo McCartney album. I wouldn't call it a Wings album because that spots Back to the Egg, but yeah, it's certainly a very, 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 very perfect McCartney album for me.
High praise. And how about you, John? It's top three? I don't remember. It's been years since I watched your McCartney.
No, probably not actually, because I think I prefer Red Rose Speedway slightly to this, and my indulgent choice as number one would be London Town. And if I'm trying to be objective, then Band on the Run is probably the closest to perfection out of any record he did post Beatles. But there's so much to enjoy about this album, and one can nitpick on a few moments here and there, and a few endings and a few Linda vocals, but on the whole, it's a work of genius. And we forgot to mention the track "Heart of the Country," which is an absolute highlight for me. And in the same vein as "Country Dreamer" and "I Lie Around," one of these effortless songs Paul wrote about the countryside, and obviously Mull of Kintyre later on. So love that. And you remember, Andrew, when we were at the BBC, then as Paul was walking away, I said, "Heart of the Country, great track." And he looked back at me and said, "Oh, you like that one, do you?"
I'm so envious of your past experiences with hanging around Soho Square waiting for McCartney. If I'd have been old enough, I'd have been there with you, no doubt.
Yes, yeah. I've talked about it many times. So
Yeah.
But
Well, I guess from my point of view, I'm terrible, really terrible at album rankings. I mean, I will go round the house. I've tried to rank McCartney's albums hundreds of times, and I've tried doing it by giving each song 3 points, 2 points, and then doing averages. I've tried every method known to man, to try to rank them, and I just find it impossible. But I'm fairly certain that Ram is not on the top of the list. But at the same token, I think, not wanting to end the video on a kind of downbeat note or anything, but I was just listening to it this evening, thinking, when McCartney finally passes on, shall we say, passes away, thinking which record am I likely to listen to first? And I was thinking it probably would be Ram. Even though I'm not putting it at the top, I'm thinking, and I think maybe it sort of cuts to the heart of why so many people love it. There's something about the Ram album which seems to, I don't know, it's like an authentic statement of some kind. There's something very McCartney-ish, McCartney-esque about it. It's like he's tapping into some core of something that's just himself. It's just all him, isn't it? If you get a bit further into the 1970s, it starts to get a bit more adulterated. You start to get, Jimmy McCulloch singing Medicine Jar, and you start to get this happening and that happening. Whereas Ram, it's just, I don't know, it just seems to be like it's just pure McCartney. You sort of cut through it with a knife, and it's just everything is just McCartney. It's like essence of McCartney.
And his wife.
I'm trying to say. What's that, John? Sorry.
And his wife.
Oh, well, true. Yeah, and his wife. Yeah, it's kind of Paul and Linda. Absolutely, the record represents this moment in time when they were just together in love, and they were just having fun. making an album and just enjoying themselves. And I think that's what comes through the record, this kind of sense of warmth and enjoyment and wholesomeness. And even though it's got these little barbed things, these little things about John Lennon and what have you, it doesn't spoil the flow of that. And it's just a very uplifting listen, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, for me, how I sort of gauge things is how often do I pull it off a shelf to play?
Yeah.
And invariably, yeah, Back to the Egg quite a few times, and you know, all the way down to whatever album I never play, you know, Driving Rain or whatever. But yeah, so I think that's how I sort of phrase it. That yeah, now I've heard it a few times today, I'll be playing that a few more times, but then probably it'll drop down when I listen to something else in the future.
It's the only McCartney album that I've got on my iPod.
Wow.
Does that mean anything? I don't know. And it's the mono mix that I've got on there.
I just wish he hadn't included that picture of two Beatles copulating on the back cover. I thought that was tasteless, not needed, and probably pissed off a few too many people, including critics.
Maybe the Beatles are just loving each other, though, John. Maybe it's meant to be a depiction of, you know, I mean...
That ain't love, mate. That's a dig.
Okay, so on that bombshell...
Happy birthday, Ram, I think.
Yeah, 50 years. I should just say I turned 50 in August this year. So this album was being recorded while I was in the womb. So I must have some kind of connection to it on some level. I don't know.
Yeah, I was 5, so I had no concept of Ram probably at the time.
Excellent. All right, folks. Well, thanks for watching. Do please leave a comment. What do you think of Ram? Is it McCartney's best album? Let us know. So I'd like to thank John and Andrew for being with me this evening. Thanks, chaps.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, anytime. You're very welcome. See you both soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.